The old brass key felt cold against my palm, a familiar weight I had carried for 40 years. It was the key Robert had placed in my hand the day the last nail was hammered into the roof, his smile as wide and bright as the summer sun glinting off the lake. "Our sanctuary, Elle," he'd said. "No matter what, this place is yours." It's peace, but peace was a distant shore I couldn't seem to reach. As I inserted the key into the lock of the solid oak door, it stopped, stubbornly refusing to turn. I tried again, jiggling it gently, the way you sometimes had to after a long, damp winter. Nothing. A knot of confusion, tight and cold, formed in my stomach. I peered through the small window pane beside the door, my hand cupped around my eyes to block the afternoon glare. And the world tilted. My chintz armchair, the one with the faded roses where I'd read hundreds of books, was gone. In its place stood a monstrous black leather recliner, complete with cup holders and a sleek, silver lever. My hand-braided rug, a kaleidoscope of colors from scraps I'd saved over decades, had been replaced by a sterile, gray shed carpet. A massive television, a flat, black void, was mounted on the stone fireplace, obscuring the mantelpiece Robert had carved himself from a piece of fallen birch. It was a violation. A quiet, creeping erasure of me, of us. A voice drifted from inside, a voice I knew too well, syrupy and edged with a proprietary cheerfulness that always set my teeth on edge. "Tom, did you remember to grab the Chardonnay? Mark said his mother prefers white, though honestly, who can keep track?" It was Carol, my son's mother-in-law. My breath caught in my throat, a tiny, ragged sound. They were here. In my house. My sanctuary. The cold key in my hand suddenly felt like a useless relic from a life that was no longer mine. This wasn't a visit. This was an occupation. A slow, methodical conquest disguised in the language of family. I stumbled back from the door, the gravel crunching under my sensible shoes. The air, usually so clean and crisp with the scent of pine and water, felt thick, suffocating. Robert's promise echoed in the hollow space where my heart was supposed to be. "This place is yours." But the lock had been changed. And I was standing on the outside. I retreated to my car, my hands trembling as I gripped the steering wheel. The engine remained silent. Where was I supposed to go? For a moment, the absurd reality of it all threatened to swallow me whole. I was locked out of my own life. I drove to the nearest town, a quaint little place with a single blinking traffic light, and checked into a sterile motel room that smelled of lemon-scented cleaner and quiet desperation. The patterned bedspread was rough against my skin as I lay down, fully clothed, staring at the textured ceiling. My mind, a frantic sea, began to throw images against the shore of my consciousness. I saw Robert, his face tanned and smiling, his hands, strong and calloused, carefully laying the foundation stones of the lake house. We were young, filled with the certainty that love and hard work were the only materials needed to build a life. A place for the noise to stop, he'd called it. A place for us, and eventually, for our son, Mark. I remembered Mark as a boy, his bare feet slapping against the wooden dock, his laughter echoing across the water as he cannonballed into the lake. I remembered teaching him how to skip stones, his small hand in mine, the perfect flat rocks we'd collect along the shoreline. This house wasn't just wood and stone, it was a living archive of my most cherished memories, the bedrock of my identity. But memories, I was learning, offered no defense against the relentless present. Carol and Tom, Susan's parents, had always operated with a kind of cheerful aggression, a smiling entitlement that steamrolled over boundaries, as if they were merely suggestions. They were masters of the fait accompli. They'd show up for dinner unannounced, rearrange my daughter-in-law's kitchen to their liking, and offer unsolicited advice on everything from finances to parenting, all under the guise of just trying to help. I had always been the peacemaker, the one who smoothed things over. My own mother had raised me to believe that a woman's role was to be the soft place in a hard world, to absorb friction, to yield. "Don't make waves, Eleanor," she'd say, her voice a gentle but firm command. So I hadn't. I had spent a lifetime stepping back, making myself smaller to accommodate the larger personalities around me. For Mark's sake. For the sake of a quiet life. I thought of my last conversation with Mark, just a week ago. He'd been distracted, his voice tinny over the phone. "Mom, Susan's parents are having some work done on their house. Major stuff. They might need a place to crash for a little while, a little while." The phrase was so vague, so elastic. I'd felt a prickle of unease then, a premonition I had dutifully ignored. "Oh, that's a big project," I'd said, my voice placid, accommodating. I hadn't asked the crucial questions. Where will they stay? For how long? It never occurred to me that my sanctuary, the one place on earth that was unequivocally mine, would be the answer. Because in their world, what was mine was simply an untapped resource. My son, caught between his wife's family and his quiet mother, had chosen the path of least resistance. He had offered up my peace as a sacrifice to keep his own. The motel room felt like a cage. The silence was heavy, punctuated only by the hum of the small refrigerator. This was the result of a lifetime of not making waves. I had allowed myself to become so accommodating that I was now homeless. The irony was a bitter pill. I had spent my life building a home, not just the physical structure, but the emotional space, the sanctuary, and I had given the keys away, piece by piece, with every silent acquiescence, every swallowed protest. The slow erasure I'd sensed through the window hadn't started today. It had been happening for years. They had been testing the locks all along, and I had never thought to check if they still worked for me. Lying there, on that lumpy mattress, a different feeling began to surface, pushing through the layers of shock and grief. It was a slow, simmering heat. It was anger. A quiet, unfamiliar anger that felt less like an explosion and more like the slow, inexorable pressure of a rising tide. And I knew, with a clarity that startled me, that I could not let this stand. I had yielded for the last time. The noise had to stop, just as Robert had intended. But first, I had to be the one to make it. The next morning, I woke with a strange sense of resolve. The grief and shock had receded, leaving behind a hard, clear purpose. I showered, dressed in my most practical clothes, and sat at the small motel desk with a cup of weak coffee. My first instinct was to call Mark, to unleash the torrent of hurt and anger that had churned within me all night. But I stopped myself. The old Eleanor would have done that. She would have appealed to his emotions, pleaded for understanding, and ultimately, been worn down by his apologies and his inevitable plea to just let it go for a while, for the sake of family harmony. The new Eleanor, the one forged in the cold fire of yesterday's discovery, knew that this was not a family matter anymore. It was a legal one. I thought back to a conversation I'd had with Robert a few months before he passed away. We were sitting on the porch swing, watching the sunset paint the lake in hues of orange and purple. He'd been quiet for a while, his hand resting on mine. "Elle," he'd said suddenly, his voice serious. "I've made sure the house is ironclad. It's in a trust, in your name only. No one can touch it, no one can force you to sell it, and no one can live in it without your explicit, written permission. It's your fortress." At the time, I'd thought it was a bit dramatic, a morbid turn in a peaceful evening. Now, his words felt like a lifeline, a weapon he had forged for me years ago, knowing, perhaps better than I did, the subtle wars I would have to fight one day. My fingers, surprisingly steady, found the number for the lawyer who had handled Robert's estate. Mr. Davies. A calm, meticulous man with a reassuringly dry demeanor. I explained the situation in a low, even voice, recounting the changed locks, the furniture, Carol's voice through the door. I expected him to be surprised, but his tone remained perfectly level. "I see," he said, a wealth of understanding packed into those two simple words. This is, unfortunately, not as uncommon as one might think. It's a classic case of what we call presumptive ownership. They act as if they have a right, hoping your reluctance to cause a scene will make it a reality. His validation was like a cool balm on a burn. I wasn't overreacting. I wasn't being selfish or unreasonable. I was being invaded. Robert mentioned a trust, I said, my voice gaining strength. He said it was protected. There was a soft shuffling of papers on his end. Yes, he was very specific, Mr. Davies confirmed. The Eleanor Vance Irrevocable Sanctuary Trust, he was quite poetic about it. The terms are exceptionally clear. You are the sole trustee and beneficiary. The property cannot be inhabited by anyone for more than 7 consecutive days without a formal lease agreement signed and notarized by you. You have every legal right to demand they vacate the premises immediately. We spoke for another 30 minutes, outlining a plan. It was simple, direct, and left no room for emotional manipulation. There would be no tearful phone calls, no dramatic family meetings. There would be paperwork. There would be official notice. There would be the undeniable authority of the law. As I hung up the phone, I felt a profound shift within me. The quiet, accommodating woman who had checked into this motel was gone. In her place was a trustee, a protector of a sanctuary. Robert hadn't just left me a house, he had left me a suit of armor. I just hadn't realized I was supposed to put it on. My phone buzzed on the desk. It was Lily, my granddaughter. My heart gave a familiar lurch of affection. Lily, with her old soul and sharp eyes, had always seen me more clearly than anyone else. I answered, my voice softer than it had been with the lawyer. Hi, sweetheart, Grandma. Are you okay? I called the lake house, and Grandma Carol answered, her voice was laced with confusion. She said you decided to stay in the city for a bit longer. Is everything all right? That doesn't sound like you. The lie was so effortless, so typical of Carol. I took a deep breath. No, honey. That's not what happened, and I told her everything. The locked door, the strange furniture, the motel. I left out the anger and the fear, sticking to the facts. On the other end of the line, there was silence, then a sharp intake of breath. That's horrible, Lily whispered, her voice fierce with a protective anger that warmed me to my core. That's your house. Dad knows that. How could he let them? She hesitated. Grandma, a couple of weeks ago, I heard Grandma Carol on the phone. She was talking to a real estate agent. She was saying they'd secured long-term accommodation and could finally put their house on the market. I didn't think anything of it, but, oh, Grandma. They are not just visiting, are they? The final piece clicked into place. This wasn't a temporary inconvenience. This was a calculated, long-term plan. They had sold their home and, with my son's complicity, had simply moved into mine. The audacity of it was breathtaking. But Lily's words, her immediate, unwavering belief in me, extinguished the last flickering embers of self-doubt. She was my ally, the clear, honest voice in a chorus of manipulation. Don't you worry, Grandma, she said, her voice firm. You do what you have to do. It's your house. It's always been your house. When I ended the call, I felt a profound sense of peace settle over me. The battle lines were drawn, my resolve was set, and for the first time in a very long time, I knew I was not fighting alone. I was fighting for my home, for Robert's memory, and for the granddaughter, who still believed in me. The drive back to the lake house 2 days later was different. I wasn't returning as a victim, but as the executor of a well-defined plan. Mr. Davies sat in the passenger seat, a leather briefcase resting on his lap. He was a man of few words, but his presence was a solid, reassuring anchor. I felt no fear, only a strange, calm certainty. I was no longer a guest petitioning for entry to my own life, I was the owner, the authority, arriving to restore order. I pulled into the gravel driveway, parking directly behind a large, unfamiliar SUV that blocked the path to the front door. The house looked the same from the outside, the grey cedar shingles, the white trim, the porch swing Robert, and I had assembled on a long-ago summer afternoon. But now a garish, brightly coloured welcome mat with the words, "Home Sweet Home," sat in front of my door. The irony was so thick it was almost suffocating. Carol was the first to emerge, wiping her hands on an apron I didn't recognize. Her face was arranged in a mask of pleasant surprise. "Eleanor. What a surprise. We weren't expecting you back so soon. Mark said you were enjoying the city." Her voice was a symphony of feigned warmth, each note carefully crafted to make me feel like the intruder. Tom appeared behind her, a newspaper tucked under his arm, a practiced, genial smile on his face. "Eleanor, good to see you. Come on in, we've just put on a pot of coffee." They were a seamless unit, their strategy simple. Act as if their presence was the most natural thing in the world, as if I were the one who was out of line. I didn't move from the driver's side of my car. Mr. Davies exited from his side, his movements deliberate and unhurried. He placed his briefcase on the hood of my car with a soft, definitive click. Carol's smile faltered for a fraction of a second, as she took in the sight of the serious-looking man in the dark suit. "Oh," she said, her tone shifting slightly. "You have a guest." "This is Mr. Davies," I said. My voice came out steady, clearer than I had expected. It didn't waver. It didn't plead. It simply stated a fact. "He is my lawyer." The word "lawyer" hung in the air, instantly dissolving the cozy domestic scene they had tried to paint. Tom's smile vanished, replaced by a guarded, wary expression. Carol's eyes narrowed. "A lawyer? Eleanor, what on earth for? Is everything all right?" The manipulative softness was still there, but now it was laced with the sharp edge of alarm. "I am here to reclaim my property," I said, my gaze fixed on her, unwavering. I did not look at Tom. I did not glance at the house. I looked directly at the woman who had tried to erase me. "You are here without my permission. The locks have been changed without my consent. You have moved your belongings into my home. I am formally asking you to vacate the premises." A flicker of genuine shock crossed Carol's face, quickly replaced by indignation. "Now, hold on a minute," Tom blustered, stepping forward. "Mark said it was fine. We are family, for heaven's sake. We sold our house, we had nowhere else to go. We thought you'd be happy to help. My son does not have the authority to give away my home," I stated, my voice remaining level. This was the moment the old Eleanor would have crumbled, overwhelmed by the appeal to family, the guilt of their manufactured homelessness. But the old Eleanor was gone. "This property is held in an irrevocable trust in my name alone. Your presence here is legally defined as trespassing." Mr. Davies opened his briefcase. He didn't say a word, but the quiet click of the latches was as loud as a gunshot in the tense silence. He produced a set of documents. "This is a formal notice to vacate," he said, his voice calm and professional. "It gives you 48 hours to remove yourselves and your property. This is a copy of the trust agreement, highlighting the clauses regarding residency. And this," he added, holding up another paper, "is a temporary restraining order, already signed by a judge, prohibiting you from entering the property once you have left." Carol's face, stripped of its cheerful mask, was pale with fury. "How dare you," she hissed, her voice low and venomous. "After all we've done for your son, for Susan. We are Lily's grandparents. You're throwing family out on the street. You are a selfish, cold-hearted woman." The accusation, meant to be a killing blow, glanced off me. I had spent a lifetime fearing those words, contorting myself to avoid ever hearing them. Now, they were meaningless. What is selfish, I said, my voice dangerously quiet, is to assume someone else's life is yours for the taking. What is cold-hearted is to lie to your own granddaughter about my whereabouts. You did not come here for help. You came here to take. And I am not giving anything more away. Just then, another car pulled into the driveway. It was Mark and Susan. They must have been called, summoned as reinforcements. Mark got out, his face a mess of confusion and anxiety. Mom? What's going on? Carol called, she said you showed up with a lawyer. He looked from me to his in-laws, his expression pleading. Mom, please, can't we just talk about this? They had nowhere else to go. I turned my full attention to my son. I saw the weakness in him then, the desire to please everyone that resulted in pleasing no one, least of all himself. There is nothing to talk about, Mark, I said, and for the first time, he heard the steel in my voice. You gave away something that was not yours to give. This is the consequence. This is a boundary. You can stand with them, I said, gesturing toward his in-laws, or you can stand with me. But you cannot stand in the middle. Not anymore. The ultimatum hung in the air. Susan began to cry. Tom was red-faced and sputtering. Carol was staring at me with pure, unadulterated hatred. And my son looked at me as if he were seeing me for the first time. Not as the soft, yielding mother he could always count on to absorb the impact, but as a woman standing on her own ground, immovable as the ancient pines that surrounded us. The power had shifted. The quiet had ended. The silence that followed was not one of peace, but of stunned defeat. And in that silence, I finally heard the sound of my own strength. The silence on the porch stretched into a taut, unbearable minute. Carol, Tom, and Susan seemed frozen, caught in the headlights of my resolve. Mark was the first to break. He took a hesitant step toward me, his hands slightly raised as if in surrender. Mom, I didn't realize, he stammered. I didn't think it would be like this. They just needed a place, and I thought. You thought I wouldn't mind, I finished for him, my voice devoid of accusation, filled only with a quiet, sad truth. You thought I would make myself smaller, once again, to solve someone else's problem. It's what I've always done. He flinched, the truth of my words landing like a physical blow. He looked over at Carol, whose face was a thunderous mask of resentment. The illusion of a happy, blended family had been shattered, revealing the ugly transactions that lay beneath. They weren't family, they were occupiers, and he had been their willing collaborator. Mr. Davies, ever the calm professional, stepped forward and placed the documents on the hood of the SUV. The notice is clear, he said to Tom and Carol. 48 hours. If you are not gone by then, the sheriff's department will be here to escort you off the property. There was no arguing with the finality in his tone. The fight was over. The emotional blackmail had failed. The legal reality was absolute. Tom snatched the papers, his face mottled with rage. He muttered something under his breath and stormed into the house, the screen door slamming behind him. Susan, weeping, followed her father. Carol, however, remained. She took a step closer to me, her eyes boring into mine. You'll regret this, Eleanor, she whispered, her voice a low threat. You've torn this family apart over a house. No, I replied, my voice as soft as hers, but firm as stone. You tore this family apart when you decided your wants were more important than my life. This house is just where the tear finally showed. I turned away from her then, a final act of dismissal, and faced my son. Mark, I said simply. He looked lost, adrift between two worlds. The next 2 days were a strange, tense ballet of removal. I did not stay at the house. I returned to my motel, leaving them to dismantle the life they had tried to build inside my walls. I instructed Mr. Davies to hire a local locksmith to be there the moment the 48 hours were up. I did not want another confrontation. I just wanted my home back. Mark called me several times. The first call was fraught with his own guilt and his wife's distress. He tried to broker a compromise, a truce. I listened patiently and then repeated myself. They need to leave, Mark. There is no compromise on this. By the third call, his tone had changed. It was subdued, humbled. I'm sorry, Mom, he said, his voice cracking. I am so sorry. I let you down. Yes, you did, I said, not to punish him, but because the truth needed to be spoken aloud. We will talk about it later. After. On the third day, at precisely noon, I drove back to the lake house. A moving truck was pulling out of the driveway, Carol and Tom's SUV trailing behind it. Carol shot me a venomous glare as they passed, but I felt nothing. Not triumph, not pity, not even anger. I felt only a vast, quiet emptiness, the kind that comes after a storm has passed. Mark's car was still there. He was standing on the porch, waiting for me. The garish welcome mat was gone. I walked up the steps, and he met my eyes. The shame in his was profound. They are gone, he said needlessly. I helped them pack. I nodded and walked past him to the front door. A new, shiny brass lock was in place. The key Mr. Davies had given me slid in smoothly, turning with a satisfying click. I pushed the door open. The house was a chaotic echo of its former self. The black leather recliner was gone, leaving a deep indentation in the new grey carpet. Scuff marks marred the walls where their furniture had been carelessly moved. The air was stale, smelling of a perfume Carol favored and the lingering scent of their presence. It felt violated. Haunted by a memory I wanted desperately to erase. I didn't say a word. I walked to the living room window, the one overlooking the lake, and pushed it open. A breeze swept through, carrying the scent of pine and damp earth. It was the first act of purification. Mark watched me, his silence a heavy weight between us. Mom, he began, I don't know what to say. Then don't say anything yet, I replied, turning to face him. Just help me. And so we began to clean. We started by rolling up the cheap grey carpet. Underneath, the original hardwood floors, the ones Robert and I had sanded and stained ourselves, were dusty but unharmed. It felt like an archaeological dig, uncovering the true foundation of the house from beneath the cheap, modern overlay. We carried the carpet outside and left it by the curb. Then we started on the walls, washing away the smudges and marks. I found my chintz armchair tucked away in the garage, covered by a dusty top. It was like finding a long-lost friend. As we carried it back inside and placed it in its rightful spot by the fireplace, I felt the first true stirring of hope. The house was breathing again. It was becoming mine again. We worked for hours, mostly in silence. It wasn't an angry silence, but a contemplative one. With every item of mine we returned to its place, with every window we opened, with every surface we wiped clean, the house began to feel less like a battleground, and more like a sanctuary in recovery. Late in the afternoon, we sat at the kitchen table, exhausted and grimy. Mark finally spoke, his voice quiet. I never saw you, he said, not looking at me but at his hands. I saw Mom a constant. A place to put things. A person who would always absorb it. I never thought about what it cost you. I let them treat your home, and you, like a resource. An empty space to be filled. I am so ashamed. His confession was raw and honest. It was the apology I needed to hear, not of excuses, but of understanding. I let you, I said softly. I let everyone. I thought that was my job. To keep the peace. But peace isn't the absence of conflict, Mark. Sometimes, peace is the quiet that comes after you've fought for the right to have it. I reached across the table and placed my hand on his. This is a new boundary. For both of us, he nodded, his eyes filled with tears, and for the first time since he was a little boy, he held my hand and squeezed it tight. The house was still a mess, but something essential had been cleaned. The foundation of our relationship, like the floor beneath our feet, had been uncovered, and we could finally begin the work of refinishing it. In the weeks that followed, the lake house slowly returned to itself, and so did I. The process of reclaiming my space was a form of healing. I donated the grey shag carpet and spent a weekend on my hands and knees, polishing the old hardwood floors until they gleamed with the deep, warm luster I remembered. I scrubbed the fireplace mantel, Robert's beautiful, hand-carved birch, until every intricate leaf and vine was free of dust. I bought a new, simple welcome mat that just said welcome, because that was enough. It was a welcome on my terms. My garden, which had been neglected, became my primary focus. I spent hours pulling up the weeds that had choked my rose bushes and my lavender plants. My hands were often sore and caked with dirt, but it felt like a sacred task. With every weed I pulled, I felt like I was uprooting a piece of the resentment and hurt that had taken root in my own heart. I was clearing the ground for new growth. As the first new buds appeared on the roses, I felt a parallel blooming within my own spirit. The quiet satisfaction of nurturing life back into my small patch of earth was profound. This was my work. This was my space. My hands, creating order and beauty, were a testament to my own resilience. Mark and I began a new kind of relationship. He would drive up on Saturdays, not with his family, but alone. He didn't come to talk about what happened, not at first. He came to help. He helped me restain the deck. He helped me fix the loose shutter on the upstairs window. He helped me chop wood for the fireplace. Our conversations were quiet, centered on the tasks at hand. It was a silent form of penance for him, and a gentle rebuilding of trust for me. We were learning a new language with each other, one built on actions rather than assumptions. One afternoon, as we sat on the newly stained deck, watching the sailboats on the lake, he finally broke the unspoken truce. "Susan and I are in counseling," he said quietly. "It's hard. She feels like I abandoned her and her parents." "I feel like I abandoned you," he sighed, a heavy, weary sound. The counselor said I spent my whole life trying to be a bridge between two shores, and I ended up drowning in the middle. "Are you learning how to swim?" I asked gently. A small smile touched his lips. "I'm trying. I'm learning that a bridge has to be anchored firmly on both sides. I never anchored myself to you, Mom. I just assumed you were bedrock. I never thought to check the foundation." It was the most honest thing he had ever said to me. The healing wasn't complete, for him or for me, but it had begun. The relationship with Susan and her parents was fractured, perhaps irreparably. I felt a pang of sadness for that, for the brokenness my granddaughter Lily would have to navigate. But I also knew it was a necessary break. Some things cannot be mended, they can only be survived. Lily visited often. She would arrive with a book in her hand and a quiet smile, and we would sit for hours in our respective armchairs, mine the old chintz, hers a new one we'd picked out together, reading in comfortable silence. Her presence was a balm. She never spoke of the incident, but her loyalty was a quiet, constant hum in the background of my new life. She saw me not as a fragile old woman, but as the protector of this sanctuary, the quiet warrior who had fought for her own peace. In her eyes, I saw my own strength reflected back at me. The house was no longer just a place of memories of the past, of a life with Robert. It had been consecrated by my own actions. It was now a monument to my own survival, to my transformation. Every gleaming floorboard, every weeded flower bed, every clean pane of glass was a testament to the fact that I had refused to be erased. The quiet here was different now. It was not the quiet of loneliness or retreat. It was the profound, resonant silence of self-possession. It was the peace I had earned. I sit on the porch swing now, a cup of tea warming my hands as the sun begins to set over the water. The air is cool and smells of pine. The house behind me is silent, a gentle, breathing presence that is wholly and completely mine. It took a violation of my peace to teach me what peace truly is. It is not something that is given to you. It is not the absence of trouble. It is the space you claim for yourself, the boundaries you defend, and the quiet strength you find when you refuse to be moved from your own ground. Perhaps you, too, have a place like this. It may not be a house by a lake. It might be a corner of a room, a cherished hobby, a friendship, or simply the quiet, sovereign territory of your own mind. It is your sanctuary. And there will be times when the world, and even the people you love, will try to change the locks. They will try to rearrange the furniture of your soul to better suit their own needs. They will do it with smiles, and with appeals to love and duty, and they will make you feel selfish for wanting to keep the key. Do not give it to them. Know that your peace is worth defending. Know that your boundaries are not walls to keep others out, but the foundations that hold you up. It is not selfish to claim the space you need to breathe. It is not cruel to say, "This is mine," it is the most fundamental act of self-preservation. Finding your voice may not be loud. It may be a quiet, simple, unshakable no, it may be the calm, steady click of a new lock turning. But it will be the most powerful sound you have ever made. And in the silence that follows, you will not find emptiness. You will find yourself. Waiting. Home.